of the European Liberal Forum, the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. Very good warm welcome to wherever you are right now. If you are in lockdown again at home, or like me, still trying to hold up the flag in your office. I hope you're healthy, but I hope you're especially relaxed at this nice morning, because we have quite a topic for you today. It has the very, very simple title and the very simple to solve issue of a new international trade order. And especially now in COVID, we have seen that national economies and companies have been slowing down. We have, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, seen a revival of dramatic protectionist measures. And we indeed have an unprecedented crisis affecting the international trade order. And all this is heightened by this increasing competition between China and the US, Europe and China, but also Europe and the United States. So less cooperation, more competition. And what we hear more and more again is this notion of a zero-sum game, and especially a certain president of a certain bigger country across the Atlantic is very good and very prominent in pointing out how much the US is losing. But this, again, is a fallacy, because as we know, the trade is not a zero-sum game. That's something that liberals are convinced of. Trade, we at least know from Adam Smith and Frédéric Bastiat, has been one of the driving factors of integration, as we also seen of Europe in the European Union, has been a driving factor in prosperity all around the globe. And Europe needs trade and economic cooperation. Europe's economic revival depends on cooperation, trade, and how we define our relation with our partners across the globe. So rather than looking inwards and looking at what's not working, we should look indeed into a new trading order system. We should look into more free trade agreements, like for instance with Vietnam, but also look at how TTIP is faring, should be faring, has been faring, what we can learn from that. And also in our direct neighborhood, look at more DCFTAs, deep and comprehensive free trade agreements with countries like Israel, for instance. One very important question that arises there is what standards we should apply for trading. Will we have strict lines, or will we have room for negotiations to avoid deadlocks, like with the United States and the Paris Accord, without throwing our values out of the window? I'm very glad that I don't have to answer those questions, but rather listening to our amazing speakers today. Just one last word about the European Liberal Forum. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our members. We have 45 members all around Europe. Fantastic organization, like I also see here in the participant list, the Paddy Ashdown Forum in the UK, which again is a very interesting topic to discuss about today. Let me quickly introduce the moderator, Beatriz Rios, EU Affairs reporter, good friend, has been moderating on the agenda for us in the past. We are so glad to have you with us again, Beatrice. Thank you very much to the speakers, Samira, Melanie, and Gerard, for being with us today. And now I will be silent and listen in, because as I said, it's one of the most important topics for liberals at the moment. And one thing I can promise you, but I will say something about that in the end, this will not be the last time that we talk about it. We will talk about trade in the future, because it is important for our future.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. So as Daniel was saying, the World Trade Organization reform, the relationship between the UK and the EU, the trade tensions between China and the US, the need to reform of the EU industrial policy, all the issues that were in a way shaping the EU trade policy are still there. And on top of that, we have an added layer of difficulty, which is a pandemic that has severely impacted the economy. The question that we ask today is to what extent that same pandemic is impacting the way we do trade. And for that, we have an amazing panel. And I would like to introduce our panelists today, Samira Rafaela, who is a member of the European Parliament from the Dutch delegation in the Renew Europe group. Thank you so much, Samira, for being here today. I would like to give you the floor first for an introductory remark, and then I will ask you a follow-up question. First of all, sorry, I forgot completely. I would like to first ask you, all the participants who are following us today, if you have questions that you would like to ask to our panelists, think about it throughout the whole event and post it in the chat group that we have. Say who you are addressing the question to, or if it's a general question, we will make sure that all of our speakers answer that question. Thank you, and please, Amira, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Beatrice, and good morning to you all. I'm very glad that you could join this very important conversation about the future of trade, because as you might already know, trade is in very difficult times. That was not only because of COVID, definitely also before COVID, and that's why as being a new MEP, I really wanted to be in the Committee on Trade because of my interest in that, but also because we have such important challenges to face. And yes, a couple of examples were already mentioned. Of course, we are dealing with some very strong economic powerhouses like the United States, like China, both not trading on our terms. And I think that when we speak about the US, we can say that, well, it's not the reliable partner anymore in this that used to be. But, you know, this is not only about Europe looking at other powerhouses. This is also about our own strategic autonomy and how we are going to make sure that we form a very strong economic bloc. And therefore, we really need to reform trade. So where is Europe in between this? I strongly believe that there is a crucial role for Europe in making trade more sustainable. I believe that we have a moral duty to use our strong economic position in order to contribute to a better world. And that is what I believe reforming trade is about. And we can do that with trade policies. Of course, it cannot solve all the issues, but it can definitely be part of the solution. And if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the shortcomings in the way we trade and behave. Instant reflexes, for example, instant reflexes when the pandemic hit Europe were to close borders. So the first reflex was we closed borders. European companies canceled orders for garments already produced in Southeast Asia, and the exports of personal protective equipment were heavily controlled and thereby limited. So we saw in the COVID-19 already the shortcomings that we have in trade, and we saw a bit of a, I would say, protectionist reflex. And that is exactly what we don't want and what we should not need, because if we speak about our strategic autonomy, if we speak about strengthening our economic position, then we should not have that. And the European Commission has now initiated its trade policy review, and there will be consultations from September with civil society organizations, with all kinds of companies that can give the European Commission input about how they think that trade should be reformed. Because also the European Commission truly need to think about the way we trade and how we can also utilize the common commercial policy to contribute to a better world. So the trade policy review is, I believe, a very a strong and good example of where we are going to. And then about the values. Well, we need values to take a center stage in our trade policy. So for that, we would need a list of transparent, objective criteria to which all our trading partners would not adhere to. So the criteria should at least include core ILO conventions, the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Children, no death penalty, and of course the respect for the Paris Climate Agreement. These are all kinds of elements that we should incorporate in future trade agreements, and where we should also be very sharp on. For example, when we vote in the Commission, I mean, that's exactly what I was very sharp on during the voting on the Vietnam Agreement, and I even gave an explanation after my voting what I found very problematic about the Vietnam Agreement. And for this, and to be able better scrutiny, we need to strengthen the role of the European Parliament also, because according to the current treaties, we only have a formal role right at the end of the process, and I think that's very problematic. I think that if we really want to strengthen trade agreements, the European Parliament should have a role that makes sure that we can control the European Commission much better and much earlier, because now it's like, hey, can you sign please? And you know, you don't have a lot to say. You can you know, vote in favor or against it, and you can ask questions, you can monitor it, but I would say not a lot of impact that you can have as the European Parliament on the way the European Commission is negotiating. So the Council gives a mandate to the Commission, and the Commission then negotiates, and then the Parliament and Council will have to give consent. Well, I think that is a very blunt instrument, because when you do not give consent, you put the complete agreement in danger, whereas you perhaps want only the small adjustments. And that was, for example, with the Vietnam Agreement. And we cannot amend, we cannot send the Commission back to the drawing board with a clear and focused mandate on individual elements of the agreements. And well, when it comes to me, that's what you will see me working on for the upcoming years, and what you will hear me about. So, and then another important topic that I'm working on, and I think that's a very good example of what we can do with future trade agreements. We definitely need to engage women with our trade policy, because we see that the outcome of trade agreements is definitely not profiting as many as people in an equal way, and a good example of that is women. So currently women receive less than 40% of the benefits of international trade in terms of jobs generated, and that's not because they are less ambitious or less educated or that they are not capable enough. Of course not. It's really because of the systemic faults in the system, and we need to address those, and for that I will propose some measures in the upcoming time. I will also write a policy paper on gender and trade for Renew Europe on it, and that is including dedicated chapters on gender and trade in all the new or modernized EU trade agreements. We want trade agreements to include strong provisions on minimum standards such as non-discrimination, equal pay, and we can also see where we can boost the sectors where women are relatively more active, and we need also gender balance in our negotiating teams, because if we do not do this, we will simply continue to not utilize the full potential of half of our population, and that is not only morally wrong, but also from an economic point of view, it's very highly foolish. So that's an example of what we can work on for when it comes to the future of trade, and we should look at, you know, all kinds of groups, consumers, and see how they profit or not profit enough from the trade agreements. And we have seen during the COVID-19 crisis and still that a lot of people and companies are being impacted by it, because we do not have the right standards yet when it comes to trade agreements. So finally, I want to bring up the mandatory due diligence, something that we can realize relatively soon. Our companies are producing all kinds of goods in all corners of the world, chocolate made from cacao produced in West Africa, clothing produced in Southeast Asia, rubber gloves from Malaysia, you name it, and so on. And often there is a dark side to the production of these goods. So horrible working standards, low wages, exploitation, and sometimes even forced labor or child labor. I asked the European Commission yesterday about the situation of the Uyghurs in China. There's proof of the Uyghurs being forced into labor. And also for the products, obviously also for the products that we are selling here in Europe. And this is something that we cannot and should never accept. So I'm very glad that Commissioner Reinders has announced that the European Commission will table a proposal on mandatory due diligence requirements. So I'm in favor of the mandatory due diligence requirements for companies importing the products onto the European internal market. Because this could really benefit all those workers in third countries while giving us fairer products. What we also see during, COVID-19 were big companies canceling their orders, and that's definitely not right because it highly negative. It highly impacts the developing countries we are working with, very negative. So I conclude. Trade is a very turbulent time, but we should not act as though that is only because of COVID. It's really a situation where we were already in, and also dealing with the United States and the upcoming powerhouses like India, China, that don't play within the rules. And in between those two, we have the European Union that is economically strong with a highly attractive internal market that enables us to impose conditions on our trading partners. And I believe that we can lead by example, and that we have to show the rest of the world that trade is rules-based and value-based. Unfortunately, trade is such an interesting and complex subject. So unfortunately, I cannot elaborate any more on it because the time is up, but please ask your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Samira. I would like to recall all the speakers that we have up to 7 minutes for introductory remarks, because otherwise we're not gonna have time for the discussion. Very quick question, Samira. You were mentioning the need to trade with values, and you were talking now about the EU corporate due diligence legislation that Commissioner Reinders announced. What do you expect from this legislation, and what do you think should be the role of the EU in trading with values in this context that we're seeing now?
Yes, well, like I said, Commissioner Reinders committed to present this EU corporate due diligence legislation. And, it's the role of companies is very important in this. So our companies are often simply not taking the moral responsibility that they should. And voluntary agreements are not that effective. So it's really the role for the European Union and for the European Commission specifically to introduce this binding due diligence requirements, so that we really have the control mechanisms to control the companies. And that would be the role of the European Union in this.
Thank you, Samira. We will probably talk more about the role of trade in promoting values and protecting human rights, upholding democracy. And I know that I am seeing that that's something that is of interest of our participants, but we will talk about it later. Now, I would like to introduce Gérard Pororel, who is an emeritus professor of economics for his introductory remarks. So please try to keep it in between 5 and 7 minutes.
Okay, I'm trying to share the screen now. Thank you there, Beatrice. Okay. Here we are. So I'll try to elaborate on a few rather technical issues, I would say, about what to expect from what we'll be confronting in the next few weeks and months regarding international trade in the very tragic circumstances our countries are going through. So what we have seen the last few months, of course, is a very stark, decrease in international trade. The reaction to this situation, I would say, is now, and this is a very delicate situation. The reaction is very ambiguous, because on the one side, what we hear and what we read from our organizations, international organizations, whether it's WTO or OECD or even the European Union. On the one side, there are, of course, calls to go back to the good old times and save the international order. But on the other side, we hear many requests for things being different, learning from the lessons regarding our health systems, regarding the situations in many industries, and also we hear many calls to relocalize jobs. Effectively, the impact of the pandemic crisis has been differentiated among industries. So we have this is airline travels. This is the automobile industry we see, and they have been very negatively affected. But we also have some industries like the streaming industries, and this is one example where the people in many countries have had no other choice, than watching TV and watching streaming programs. And this is also, and we should not neglect this sector, because the streaming industry now worldwide is a very big industry. It compares to the automobile industry. So entertainment is a very important industry for the future. So now, what do we have in terms of EU policies? So we have had a series of very important, very strong initiatives. We have the March 2020 document on defining long-term industrial strategy with the three imperatives, and then we have the initiative which was just mentioned by our MEP, to analyze the risks and needs of different industrial ecosystems to begin in September. And this is, I would say, this will be, for reasons I will delve into, this will be a very important exercise. Then we have some specific initiatives called the Project of Common Interest for Strategic Value Sales. And of course, we have the very big discussions about what will concretely happen with the recovery plan and the multi-annual financial framework, which will be discussed at European Parliament and national parliaments. So we already have a series of initiatives which will shape the European Union's position regarding international trade. But if we take a quick look at the context, of course, we all know about the erratic behavior of our friends across the pond. But of course, all our hopes are that the things will change after the November 2020 elections. But let's not be wrong about what to expect about America, because it's been a while that America has changed its posture in international trade, and America is not a free trade is not a free trade power. And if we take a look, like I did, at Joe Biden's presidential election program, the buzzword is made in America by American workers, which doesn't bode well for open borders. But we know about this. We know that it's been at least 20 years that America has changed its stance on international trade. Now, about China, of course, the problem we have is that China is very strongly integrated in the world economy. The EU-China relationships are very intricate, and China is extremely big. You know, it's 20% of the world population. So to balance the power of China, the EU has to put together what we could call a coalition of the willing. We should discuss with India, Southeast Asia, Japan, Africa, and of course the US, because only together can we balance the weight of China. So then what's very important to know for the future is what is strategic for Europe, and in this we still need clarification at EU level. We are just at the beginning of defining what's strategic and what we should do in trade negotiations in the next few years. Well, one element I will insist on is that there will be pressures to define strategic sectors, strategic goods to be produced locally or regionally. What I would say is that this is a very delicate matter, and even defining strategic goods and services should be ideally internationally coordinated. Then, okay, and then another very important point is that even in this situation where the attempts, at putting together some bureaucracy and make choices on industrial strategies, you should be very careful to maintain competitive efficiency and avoid drawbacks of bureaucracy. Just to make an example, even in the strategic services, which we would say should be managed at EU level, we should be very careful to maintain a competition in the provision of goods and services. So now, my conclusion. So we have a rather multidimensional policy objectives framework. I won't go into the details. We know all this, but the important thing is that in the past decade, or in the past 2 decades, one problem we have had, this was before the pandemic, was the divorce between globalization principles and regional EU and national economic principles. And this divorce has led to populist reactions, and in the future we should be very careful to keep together our policy objectives, internal and international, to avoid future populist backlashes. And then the second thing is the instruments we have at EU level for the moment, I would say, this is my personal opinion, should be improved. And we should have a debate on the importance of hard instruments like funding and soft instruments like industry coordination. So in the next few 2-3 months, very soon, we should encourage our institutions to put together a consistent framework of soft instruments, which we prefer, and maybe some hard instruments of industry strategy, possibly impose regulatory rules, which we do not like as a principle, but which might be necessary in this situation. always keeping in mind that competition policy is at the core of the dynamism of the economy of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerard, for your very interesting remarks. I think definitely one of the reflections that I will ask you to make later on would be how we have the US turning into a more protectionist actor in the international trade. We have China that has passed from being an emerging economy to becoming an economic power. And now we have a pandemic, and definitely the whole trade system is changing. What role should have the EU, whether we need to be more proactive. But I'm going to try to move into the next speaker to make sure that everyone does their introductory remarks, and then we will move into the discussion. So I would like to introduce Melanie Bochelbach, who is Managing Director of the International Economic Policy Department of the Association of the German Chairman of Industry and Commerce. So please, Melanie, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Patrice, and thank you very much for the invitation to this panel. I think this discussion is extremely timely, as has been mentioned before. I'm representing the German Chamber Organization with the umbrella of German regional chambers of commerce and industry, representing about 3.5 million businesses in Germany, so small and large. For us, of course, as Ra mentioned, the pandemic has affected the economy and German businesses, as businesses all across Europe, very heavily. I'm not going to go into detail with regards to numbers, as Gerard covered that. Just one number, maybe from our own surveys. We survey companies at home and abroad, because lots of German companies, as European companies, are based outside the European Union, and more than 80% of them say their revenues this year will be negatively affected by the pandemic. And we're now looking at, from our surveys, we're looking at a negative GDP growth of 10% this year in Germany. And our exports will probably be reduced by 15% this year. So this entire discussion, the way how globalization, how trade will change, is very heavily in fact affecting German businesses, because we are a very export-oriented economy. About a quarter of German jobs depend on exports. In the industry, it's almost half of all jobs in general. The discussion in the last couple of months and weeks with regards to the pandemic and how it will change international trade, or the international trade order, globalization, I have to say that it does worry us a little bit. We've seen the rise of protectionism. We've seen that before the pandemic, but as Samira mentioned in the beginning, when the pandemic hit, there was some sort of a reflex of protectionism. Borders were closed, but also within the European Union, there were export bans, and we saw companies, German companies, that could not even deliver protection gear to their subsidiaries inside the European Union. So that was not the idea that of course we all have of the benefits of free trade and globalization, and what made our economy strong in the past. So that does worry us. The debate about deglobalization, reversing globalization, relocation, and reshoring of production activities. My opinion is that the pandemic will not necessarily reverse globalization, but it will definitely change globalization a little bit. It will probably accelerate some trends. We've already seen that. Some were mentioned by the other two speakers already. We've seen trends of digitalization, of sustainability becoming much more important. We've seen a stronger role of the state, not just with protectionist measures, but also with at least discussions about managing supply chains. That's and production activities, reshoring crucial strategic activities to the European Union. We're a little bit hesitant when it comes to those things. I think there's very often other ways. It's about smart diversifying and not necessarily about reshoring all your activities. So I think when there is a debate about what strategic activities there are that are crucial to have at home, I think it's very important to look at several aspects to not make that definition too broad, because diversification is something that has been of benefit to all of us. And then we have the decoupling, a trend that we've seen, the conflict between the US and China, and a trend of decoupling. That's something that is also extremely worrisome to German businesses, because both the US and China are crucial trading partners. The US has long been Germany's largest export market. China is our largest trading partner overall in the world. And in both markets, there's about 5,000 German businesses based, each with about 1 million jobs. So those markets are crucial and our economies are intertwined. So it's pretty much impossible to decouple all German activities. And what we've seen in the past from this trade war, that's also really heavily affecting European businesses. And one aspect that also worries us is that very often those political strategic interests seem to be more intertwined with trade interests. We've seen that with sanctions, exterritorial sanctions that have been imposed that do affect businesses. That's a trend that has also been accelerated, and that's something that we're also worried about. So what to do? I think there's two key things that the European Union needs to focus on. One thing is to work against protectionism, oppose that, and the other thing is to work on European resilience. And of course, that's easier said than done. That's why this is a very important debate, and I very much look forward to the discussion to follow. But there are some things that can be done rather quickly, or that can be done by the European Union, and I think they are very important to be done in terms of working against protectionism. Daniel in the beginning mentioned working towards new trade agreements, TTIP. Yes, of course, it would be great to have a great trade agreement with the United States, especially in these times. It would help us. I would also like to mention the Mercosur Agreement, which could be the largest trade agreement of the European Union, and a huge chance to also set standards in an area where there are not that many agreements yet. So I think that would be a great chance. And of course, Australia, New Zealand, all these agreements, they might not be as large, but I think especially in these times, it's very important to also put forward positive impulses and show the European Union's commitment to a rules-based system, because we do need rules, we do need a strong WTO, and that's of course also one huge priority for the next couple of months. There will be a new director of the WTO, and I think it's very crucial to modernize the WTO to find a solution for the appellate body, so that we have rules for the trade system. And then strengthen European resilience. I think that is very important, especially during that situation of the trade conflict between those huge powers, the United States and China. And we do now in the European Union have a new chief trade enforcement officer. I think that's a great thing. And I think his job should be and has to be in the next couple of months, especially to work against protectionism, and to make sure that the agreements that we do have already, that they are implemented, and that we can move forward to new agreements, because I think especially in these times, that is very crucial also to overcome the negative impacts of the crisis.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I would like to first recall our participants that if they want to ask questions, we have a chat. You can type your question, say to whom of our speakers you are directing the question, and we will bring you in. I would like to launch the debate addressing the biggest issue that we are discussing, which is we've seen throughout the crisis protectionist measure applied even by the most liberalist trade partners in the world. Are we seeing these trends as a reaction to an emergency, or this is something that could stay? Because we are seeing also that there is a call to bring back supply chain, but there is some other partners are thinking about more liberalization and more diversification of the supply chain. So can we expect the deglobalization, or we are just in a moment where we are facing an emergency and this is a panic reaction in a way, but the minute that the economy goes slightly back to normal, we would be back to a normal system and we will have a more liberalized trade? Maybe Samira, you could react to that.
Yes, thank you. So I think we can definitely say that in the beginning it was a reflex of, and I think it's very logical, of course, of panicking. You know, it's. I think it was a logical reaction that, in the first place, the member states were focused on, okay, what's happening within my borders. I just need to make sure that at least within my borders we get safety and security as soon as possible. So I always say that, you know, I can be looking at this from a political perspective. I can be understanding towards such reflex, but it's very important that we need to get out of that as soon as possible, because again, the protectionist behavior is exactly what we don't want and what you cannot use, especially in a crisis, because this was also about the medical equipment and medical goods that needed to be exchanged as soon as possible, you know. So it was also it was a high risk that we were facing because of that. So I think, yes, it was a response to the emergency situation that we were in. But if we look, for example, at the United States, its current administration, you know, you see a pattern of protectionist behavior. For example, the import tariffs on products like steel, and so I would say it's a combination of that, and we need to be very careful and sharp, and monitor this trend very well to see where it's going to. So that would be my answer for now.
I would like to address one specific aspect of this question that was actually asked by one of our participants, Matthew, who was asking, how do you define which goods and resources are strategic, knowing that any protectionist measure taken in relation to them will invite reciprocal measures from other economic areas? I would like to ask this question to Gerard and Melanie, who both address this question of what strategic is about. So Gerard, maybe you can react to this.
Melanie would like to.
Yes, well, I think it's not an easy question to answer, but as I said, I think it's really important to look at alternatives while making that definition. I think diversification, as I mentioned before, is a good alternative. There can be activities in other countries, also outside of the European Union, but closer to our borders. But also there's the matter of storage. We had the situation of ventilators that were short in many countries outside of the European Union and here. And when we know what could be needed in future crises, in future pandemics, and when it's medical goods, and it's not just about being dependent on one market to import all of it, but to have it in store in larger capacities, or to have a diverse group of suppliers. I think that is an alternative that we could also work with on several levels. And I think those alternatives need to be taken into consideration before making a decision to reshore all the activities to the European Union, because what we always say is it should be the business's decision also where to produce all those goods, and so to reshore everything, I think we should be hesitant and first look at those possible alternatives. But I myself, I cannot make the distinction of what precise products would be the most crucial and most strategic. I just warn that it should be narrow defined.
There is definitely a need for that discussion now that we're reviewing our trade policy and that we're coming up with different policies. Some of the things that you mentioned before there as well was how there is this debate between the need to reform the existing trade system, preserving the international order, or some new partners are trying to reshape it in a different way. We have the need to reform the WTO. We have, as Melanie mentioned before, there's going to be a change in the Director General of the organization. And we increasingly see the EU as being way more proactive in this kind of process. How do you see the role of the EU in reforming the trade system, particularly now that we are seeing the huge impact of the pandemic on it?
Question is to me? Yes. Well, I would say the important perspective for the EU is is that globalization is here to stay. We have reached a stage in the world economy where there are changes, modifications in supply chains, but now the complexity of supply chains is such that we cannot do without it. And if we look at very critical elements of the industry supply chains, like electronic components, etc., we see that those productions are highly concentrated, and it would be extremely difficult for specific regions, including the EU, to change radically this situation. So in this respect, I would say that the exercise, which will take place from September on jointly with all stakeholders, not only EU institutions, but the industry and social stakeholders, this will be, in my opinion, the crucial exercise. Because like I said, the problem we'll have in the next few months is to fix the damage which has been done in the past 20 years by the divorce between international trade principles, international trade flows, international trade realities, and the situation in some parts of our economies with very dangerous political backlashes. So for me, this will be the critical exercise, and we will have to put together all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzles for our policy for the EU policy in the future.
Thanks a lot, Ger. It's comprehensive approach, as we like to call it in Brussels. I'm going to try to regroup because we have a lot of questions, which is great. Thank you so much, all the participants, for sending all so many questions. I'm going to try to regroup a couple of them, both related to the question of value. So I think, Samira, this one is going to go to you. One of them is asked by Ivan, who said, how exactly will we enforce our values of human rights with China, one of our biggest trading partners? And then there was another question who was originally addressed to Ger, but I think I'm going to stick with Samira here. Social and environmental demands in trade with third-party nations should be two-way streets. So otherwise, environmental, for example, in the EU will be offset as well. and for parties to the parties agreement should be marching to the same tune as of the same trade system to create openness and trust in the climate mitigation pathways. So yeah, this question would be how do we enforce human rights, particularly with China, but also when it comes to social and environmental objectives, how do we do that with trading partners, making sure this goes both ways, that we respect and they respect also the rules. So maybe Samira, if you want to jump in.
Yes, well, you know, this is exactly why we say that we should reform these, reform trade and change the trade agreements by demanding these kind of provisions and demanding these kind of standards. And that is also exactly why the European Parliament should have a stronger role in that, so that we can monitor and control also how the European Commission is negotiating the trade agreements. So both to your question, my answer to both questions would be that is something that you can only reach if you are willing to use the trade agreements as also a way to uphold these standards and to demand these standards. I'm also a rapporteur on the modernized agreement with Chile. And that is exactly a negotiation in which we are now talking about the gender and trade chapter, but also about these gender provisions, but also about the rights of indigenous people. You know, and that is something that you can do now through these trade negotiations. So I would say that's the only way to demand these standards and to make sure that they agree upon that. But then the next question would be, if they don't, if they decide during the negotiations that they will not uphold these standards, then what do you do? And I think that's the second important question that the European Union needs to answer. Are we then willing to not have the agreement? Are we then willing to find other ways to demand it? And especially when you're dealing with such strong powerhouses like China, what do you do then? But, you know, that is why we need to find the strength, first of all, in the European Union itself, and making sure that we are forming a strong bloc and that we agree upon having a different way of trade. Because if we strengthen our autonomy, then we can demand that.
Thanks, Ala. There has been a huge debate surrounding this, particularly when it comes to environmental objectives with Mercosur, but also when it comes to human rights in Vietnam, the question of enforcement, right? Like we can agree on a trade agreement, but how can we make sure that these countries are going to apply to the rules? I would like now to give the floor to Vice President of ALDE, Henrik Mortensen, for a quick remark. Please, Henrik, you have the floor. Henrik?
Hello, I'm not really aware if you can hear me. Would you please confirm?
Yes, we can.
Super. Hi, this is Henrik Mortensen from Denmark. I think this is a very, very important discussion, particularly to us liberals. I think for as long as I can remember, we've been very much aware that global wealth, as well as the wealth for each person in most of our countries, very much hinge on the trade, particularly coming from a small country like Denmark, and indeed most of the European countries on a global scale are quite small. So we all have depended heavily on the free trade, particularly when you think of, well, most of the post-Second World War period. And I think particularly if you take the last 1 or 2 decades, it's important to remember that one of the reasons why ordinary citizens have experienced increased wealth and increased standards of living are mainly due to more developed global value chains and trade, So even if wages haven't increased in many of our countries, real wages have still increased because the prices of goods have fallen. So we should keep our minds focused on all the benefits of free trade. And of course, it's very obvious that we are all fearing for trade now in light of Corona and other crises. But I think we should find ways to save the freedom of trade as much as possible. And it's indeed a very difficult and strange situation we're in, because even though the global economy is hit so hard by Corona, in many of our countries, the stock markets are very, very high. So the trust in the future of our economies in many places is incredibly high. There might be all sorts of reasons for that, but I mean, the proof of the pudding is eating it. And we can see that, for instance, in my own country, stocks have never been as high. So it's a very mixed emotion. Everybody's looking towards the future. But I think if there was really serious threats to trade, these things could change very rapidly, especially in our export-oriented countries. And I think we should be very much aware that there are all kinds of interests who projects protectionist ideas. Even our friends, our democratic friends in the US have been mentioned. We all know traditionally the Republicans have been free trade and the Democrats have been a bit reluctant, just to mention one example. So the threats are really coming from all over the place. I think one of the main issues we as liberal should stick to is that international trade should be as free as possible. And the vital thing is that it should be rule-based. If it's not rule-based, it will be impossible to enforce rules about a free trade. And this gives us some problems concerning what limits to free trade we should accept. And I'll come back to that. There are limits we should accept. But it's very important that no matter which rules we accept, they should be enforceable and should be understandable. Because basically all barriers are bad to the idea of generating wealth through open trade. But I think, and it has been mentioned, but there's one thing which I would like to point to as primarily as an economist, but also as a politician. Up through the 80s, 90s, and later on, we were all very much impressed by the growth of the Chinese economy. Everybody in our countries enjoyed cheaper Chinese goods of high quality and so on. But I think we really failed to see that, for instance, the Chinese were really using the international trade system in an unjust way. And it was the most intricate abuse of free trade which we've seen, because you don't have to, as I did, you didn't have to travel a lot in China to see what was really going on. I mean, we had a huge factory company where workers had their wages kept at a very, very low level because of political oppression. That enabled an economy to produce at very, very low costs. There was no possibility of forming unions which could demand fair wages and so on. But we have really accepted this for a very, very long time. So I think these sort of basic human rights, the right to form free labor unions and demand a just price for your wages and so on, is definitely one of the things we will have to look into in the future. And of course, matters of environmental issues such as sustainability and so on is another important issue. But we must try to keep it as simple and as enforceable as possible.
Thank you so much, Henrik. I'm sorry, but we're really running out of time. It was very interesting, everything you said, and we thank you a lot for your intervention, which was a good way to put it all together very quickly. And I would like to give the floor now to our speakers for a very short last thought about everything that we discussed today, very quickly. So please, Amira, 1 minute straightforward, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. So this has been a very good discussion about the future of trade. And I just want you to know that how I'm thinking about it is that we in the European Union, we definitely have the possibilities, we have the leverage, and we have the power to form a strong economic strategic bloc. And we can set the example in the rest of the world. And I really believe that we can use these trade agreements, not only rules-based, but definitely also value-based, to strengthen the human rights position of women, young people, everyone worldwide, but that we can also make sure that we protect and that we protect our climate through trade agreements. So we have many examples of what we can do with trade agreements, but it's very important that we have as many groups and people that believe in trade being also an instrument to make that happen. And so thank you very much for this conversation, and please continue with these conversations, because that really helps also us in the European Parliament to make this very important topic visible. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Samira. Gerard, please, for your last remark.
Yes, well, the issues raised by Samira, in my opinion, are quite central, because the European Union is above all a civilization project. I think the most ambitious and the most successful civilization project in recent history. So to make this project sustainable in the long run, we need two things, I would say. Sometimes we will have to bear costs. We'll have to bear costs, and we should be ready to bear the costs of our civilization project. And second, it will be extremely important, and the European Union has the most powerful diplomatic force in the world, and it will be very important to build a coalition with possibly with America and with Japan, Southeast Asian countries, Australia, because we share common goals, we share common difficulties, and only by building a coalition can we balance the power and the difficult power we are facing with China.
With the coalition of the willing, I move into Melanie for that last remark, please.
Thank you, Beatrice. I think Henrik put it very good and precise. I think we need to emphasize in this particular time the benefits of trade and the benefits of globalization to counter this debate that we're having at the moment. And I think with regards to the entire debate about due diligence, of course, there are many very important issues with regards to sustainability that of course are also crucial for businesses in Europe. But I think we do need to be mindful that we cannot overburden trade agreements and or trade rules, because they cannot solve all the problems that we do see in the world. Nevertheless, of course, those issues are important. I think it's important to stick to the EU path of a rules-based, WTO committed system and push that forward. I think that is the strength of the European Union, also to counter other movements that we see in the world. So I hope we will see a positive development in that regard, and then also to get out of the negative effects of the pandemic that we've seen.
Definitely a lot of wishes for a more proactive European Union. I would like to thank everybody for being here today. I would like to apologize because we couldn't ask all the questions that were raised by our participants, but Daniel promised that we're going to keep on talking about trade. So there's no problem, because you will have sometime the chance to ask those questions. So I would like to give the floor back to Daniel now, who would say a few closing remarks and announce the next on the agenda session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Thank you very much, Samira, Melanie, Gerard, for a most interesting discussion. And as Beatrice rightfully said, this is far from over, both in terms of trade, fortunately, but also in terms of our debates about trade. And as Samira pointed out, this is a topic that needs to be discussed in the European institutions, but also within the community here in Brussels and the community here in Europe, with businesses, but also civil society organizations. Because again, to hint to something that Samira said in her beginning intervention, looking at values, at European values, and Samira mentioned the Uyghurs and China in the beginning, this is something that we need to look at. And I would like to make just 4 short points at the end. Number 1, once more again, trade is not a zero-sum game, as people would like you to believe. There is one side that gives something, a good or a service, and there is another side that gives money. And there's always a higher value to both sides. And it's a very simple equation. That's the same thing if you go to a Starbucks or any other coffee house and give money for a coffee. They think your coffee, their money is more worth than the coffee that they give you, and you think the coffee is more worth than the money that they give you. So both of you win in the end of the day. The second one, indeed, and I would like to stress it again, trade has to be connected to values, especially when it comes to the right of women, when it comes to labor and forced labor, child labor, and environmental standards. It cannot be that Europe is outsourcing its environmental problems to third countries, and we have especially mentioned China here, and it's something I think that needs to be highlighted. Sometimes, and I have to say I disagree slightly with the Renew group on this, we have to be more open and maybe a bit more ambitious when it comes to the climate and the sustainability and environmental targets. Paris Accords are nice, but Paris Accords are very ambiguous in a lot of points. And I think looking also at the further environmental impact and having higher standards and not only referring to an abstract document might be the better choice here and there, both in terms of climate sustainability and environmental standards. Last thing, one of my favorite liberal philosophers, Frédéric Bastiat, I mentioned him in the beginning, said something that I think it's very true. And he said, paraphrased, if goods can't cross borders, soldiers will. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. Trade is not only for trade's sake, it's also for connection's sake. If you talk to people, if you trade people, it's less likely that you are aggressive towards those people. If you have economic integration, it is less likely that you will have military or political conflict. And that is always something that we have to have in mind. And ECSC for Europe was the first part of a European integration. And that was based on joint trade, especially when it came to steel, which dropped the prices for steel, which made the recovery in Europe possible. Europe is the living proof. The EU is the living proof that we need trade in order to strive, survive, prosper, and live peacefully. And that is something that we should remember, especially as liberals. The last thing I want to say, I mentioned at the beginning, this is far from over when it comes to talking about trade. We will do that in the future. The first thing that we will do is talk next week on the 5th of August with our members from the Paddy Ashdown Forum. Melanie mentioned in the beginning Mercosur, the Mercosur trade agreement. We will talk about trade and forestry with Mercosur. We especially have a focus now, the trade with Latin America in terms of climate targets, environmental targets. So next week, 5th of August, we'll be talking about trade, forestry, climate, amongst other, with a minister from Argentina and the EU Mercosur relations. Last thing, really, thank you so much once more again, Samira, Melanie, Gerard, Beatrice, all the people who were in with us today, and hope to see you next time on the agenda, where we'll be talking about the future of the banking union in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.